Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A warm Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church welcome to those whose ancestor or relative is listed on the plaques that will soon be unveiled, and also to those who are members of this church who are joining us for this plaque dedication. For those who don't know me, I'm Dale Hansen, the archivist for this church. Let me give you just a little background information on me and how this project came to fruition. My father served in World War I. I had two half-brothers who served in World War II. One brother, Robert, was killed in May 1945, 10 months before I was born, when his B-25 Mitchell medium bomber that he was piloting crashed in China, likely the result of enemy ground fire. The crew of 6 all died in that crash, and their bodies were never recovered. My other brother, Ralph, served in the 87th Infantry Division in World War II and saw combat in the Battle of the Bulge. I graduated from West Point in 1968, served on active duty for 6.5 years, to include a tour in Vietnam, then served 23.5 years in the reserves, retiring as a colonel. So I'm no stranger to the sacrifices and no stranger to the military and the sacrifices that the men and women incur in that service. It was about 3 years ago when I spoke with the Reverend Dr. Scott Black Johnston and sought his agreement to establish a plaque honoring those members and friends of our church who served in World War I, World War II, and Korea. He agreed that we needed to honor the memory of our members and church friends often being relatives of members of our church, and indicated that I should make it happen. He and I believe that we have a sacred obligation to remember and recognize our veterans. The sense of duty that motivates veterans in sacrificial service to their country instructs us by modeling honorable values that we should embrace. Veterans, in addition to instructing us, also inspire us to care as deeply about human liberty as they did while serving. Said another way, veterans point us towards the best that humanity has to offer. So, how did I make it happen? I knew if I spoke to Scott and talked about the project, I'd be the one doing it, but that was fine because I was anxious to get started. Fortunately, we had church publications that listed those members and friends who served in the wars. For World War I, we have 8 different weekly bulletins over a few years, and a Christmas card created by the Reverend Dr. John Henry Jowett, who was our senior pastor from 1911 to 1918. That listed those that were in service. For World War II and Korea, we only had 1 listing. Of course, the names that were listed on the 9 sources for World War I did not match, and they did not always clearly distinguish between people serving in the military branches and serving in civilian enterprises that supported the war. However, after many reviews of the name, with help from my wife, Joyce, and Doug Bennett, a Navy veteran, the list of friends and members of this church serving during those 3 conflicts totaled 366 names. That was 199 for World War I, 146 for World War II, and 21 for Korea. We listed the names in first name, middle initial, and last name format to the extent possible. We provided these names to Paul Zimmerman Foundries in Pennsylvania, who produced the 2 plaques that you will soon see unveiled. The men and women on these plaques served in the Army, Army Air Corps, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard. These names represent officers, enlisted personnel, nurses, and students who were in ROTC preparing for active duty. 6 of those veterans died during World War I. Nearly 6 months ago, I began a search for relatives of those veterans. It seemed most appropriate that we notify relatives that these plaques would be dedicated and invite them to this service. For some veterans, of course, the name was very common and we had little information about them. In other cases, however, we were able to develop information that led to a descendant. Ted Peck, another member of this church, helped me with this search. We think we located relatives for at least 110 service members. In our efforts to locate relatives, we found pictures of 124 of these veterans. In the back of the chapel, you will see a small portion of those pictures. After this dedication ceremony, we will have a luncheon for those of you who are here specifically to honor one or more of the veterans on these plaques. At that time, I'll introduce you by name. We're so gratified that you're here, knowing that in many instances you've traveled quite a distance and incurred New York City's expenses. But you've done so wanting to honor your relative just as much as this church wants to honor all 366 individuals on these plaques. You come from 10 different states, from as far away as Tucson, Arizona, and as nearby as Manhattan. I believe we have a total of 61 individuals here today to honor 20 of the veterans on the plaques. If you are here on behalf of a veteran that's listed on that plaque, would you please stand so that we can recognize you? Thank you very much. Many individuals whose names are on the plaque do not have relatives in today's audience. I'd like to mention just a few of those individuals. Serving in World War I, Lieutenant Junior Grade Winthrop W. Aldrich was later ambassador to England from 1953 to 1957 under President Eisenhower. Captain James C. Auchincloss was a member of the United States House of Representatives representing New Jersey from 1943 to 1965. Captain John F. Dulles, for those of us senior citizens such as I, that's actually John Foster Dulles, and he became Secretary of State from 1953 to 1959, also under Dwight D. Eisenhower. John Foster Dulles was a brother of Allen Dulles, who was a member of this church, and Allen was the first civilian director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Second Lieutenant Walter G. Dunnington, Jr., again, World War I. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. That's our nation's second highest award for valor in military action. He was wounded and gassed while directing the fire of a platoon in his company. Although the area surrounding his position was heavily saturated with gas, he removed his gas mask so that his commands could be heard over the roar of the guns. Lieutenant Commander Truman H. Newberry, Secretary of the Navy from 1908 to 1909, U.S. Senator from Michigan from 1919 to 1922. Captain Albert Vanderveer, Jr., who, together with his wife, Sylvia, in May 1946, donated the baptismal font that you saw in use in this morning's service. First Lieutenant Wilbert W. White, Jr., an Army Air Force pilot credited with 8 aerial victories, who received an oak leaf cluster to the Distinguished Service Cross. The oak leaf cluster signified that that was his second award of the second highest medal for valor. Serving in World War II was Sergeant Richard R. Gilbert. His father was organist at this church from 1921 to 1953. Serving in Korea, we have Colonel Charles C. Sloan. He received a Silver Star, our nation's third highest award for military valor, for actions in September 1950 while commanding the 9th Infantry Regiment, 2nd Infantry Division. I'd like to thank those who helped with this event. Claire Myers-McCormick, our soloist, Sheena Brisbane, who created the printed program, posters, and slideshows, Katie Miller, Scott's executive assistant, who coordinated all the efforts by various individuals. She'll delete a lot of emails from her email after this service because I've been sending lots of messages to her. Sergeant First Class George Lopez, U.S. Army retired, who soon will play taps. Dr. Ryan Jackson, our music director. Dr. Patrick Krieger, our organist. Derek Madalena, our director of facilities, and Sabrina Rodriguez, facility coordinator, who arranged for the plaques to be mounted. Doug Bennett and Joyce Hansen, who helped develop the list of names. Ted Peck, who helped search for descendants. Mark Lovesey, who suggested Paul Zimmerman Foundries as a plaque producer. And of course, Reverend Dr. Scott Black Johnston, who approved and encouraged this project. This concludes my remarks. I'll be available for questions after the unveiling and of course during the luncheon. Again, thanks to all of you for attending this event.
New friends, I want to begin by echoing Dale's welcome to all of you who have traveled here today to honor these amazing people. Thank you for coming to New York and for attending this service. You bless us and you bless this day with your presence. I also want to spend a brief moment continuing what Dale has already begun, that is thanking the individuals whose passion and diligence moved this remembrance of Fifth Avenue's veterans from a good idea to brass-bound reality. I want to thank the church's property committee, folks who've already been mentioned, Doug Bennett, Ted Peck, Bob Henn, Joyce Hansen, Derek Madalena, Sabrina Rodriguez, Jess Levine, Sheena Brisbane, and Katie Miller for their thoughtful work. But most of all, I want to thank Colonel Dale Hansen. Dale, your persistence and passion for honoring veterans is a testament both to your character and to your faith. Dale, we are all grateful to you.
Once again, good afternoon. I've met several of you so far, so I'm sure you recall and know I'm Dale Hansen. I got distinct impressions that you enjoyed the dedication ceremony downstairs, so I'm glad to hear of that. Before we get started on introductions of those of you that are here, let me give you just a few pieces of information about this church. This church was founded in 1808, and it began its life in Lower Manhattan. At that time, it was known as the Presbyterian Church in Cedar Street. Not surprisingly, it was on Cedar Street, which still exists today. Today, it's occupied by the Chase Manhattan Bank. I don't know what that means with respect to this church, but We brought along good finances there. We moved 3 times after that, from Cedar to Duane to 19th Street on Fifth Avenue, and we got here in 1875. At the time, because of our spire on the top, we were the tallest building in New York City. We no longer, of course, occupy that title, but we had that for just a brief amount of time. Kirkland Chapel that you were in for the dedication ceremony, that was built in 1925 along with the rest of the church house, and that's named after a former senior pastor of our church, Reverend Dr. Bryant Mays Kirkland. Dr. Kirkland served this church from 1962 to 1987. We use the chapel frequently for weddings and for musical performances. This is Bonnell Hall, and Bonnell Hall is named after another senior pastor, the senior pastor that preceded Dr. Kirkland, John Sutherland Bonnell. And John Sutherland Bonnell served this church from 1937 to 1962. Over this church's lifetime, we've had 17 senior pastors. That includes one stint where we had 2 co-pastors, a rather rocky arrangement and never repeated since. Those 17 senior pastors have come from Australia, Canada, England, Ireland, Scotland, and of course the United States. We started with 26 charter members, and now we have over 2,000 members. As a church, we've always been very active in outreach, mission work, and education. We've been known for great preachers. Certainly Dr. Kirkland and Dr. Bonnell carried on that tradition. And now Reverend Dr. Scott Black Johnston carries on the tradition. Scott has been with us since 2008. Now this is the time that I'm taking attendance to see who showed up that said they were coming. I'm going to find out that a few people showed up that didn't tell me, and maybe there's a few that thought they were coming and at the last minute they had a problem and couldn't make it. But I hope you had enough food. I was told later that maybe I shouldn't have encouraged it. Maybe we have some walk-ins. That's fine. I'm glad you're here. But hopefully everybody got enough so they can get back to their home or their hotel and not be hungry. As I mentioned earlier, when I mention your veterans, the veteran's name, please stand up. In some cases, if your veteran has a brother, continue to stand so you won't be doing a jack-in-the-box. But once I've moved on, have a seat. And the ranks that I will introduce these people at as are the ranks that we knew them at. Some of them stayed on longer from World War I or II and got promoted and so on, but we researched their rank. We're using the rank that they were known at when they were here in the church. Someone asked about people who served in the church and aren't listed or could be listed. The criteria was you had to be a member or friend of this church during the conflict. So if you joined the church afterwards and said during 1947 and said I served in World War I, thank you for your service, but you're not on the plaque. Somebody asked, why didn't we do Vietnam? I would love to have done Vietnam. We did not have the records that would support the listing of Vietnam veterans or any of the other conflicts, which unfortunately we've been in since the Korean War. As far as I know, today we have 25 individuals that are here honoring 9 World War I veterans. Captain James Fearon Brown. He served at Camp Grant, Rockford, Illinois. His granddaughter, Nan Rawlings, unfortunately, was going to be here. She was in the dedication ceremony, but had to leave unexpectedly. His granddaughters, Carrie Stefaniak and Alice Brown, coming here from Cookeville, Tennessee, his great-grandson Matthew Risk and Matthew's girlfriend Delaney Chambers from Manhattan are here. Also, they will continue to stand. These same folks are here for Captain James Fearon Brown's brother, First Lieutenant Robert Ray Brown. Nan, Carrie, and Alice would be his grandnieces. His great-grandnephew would be Matthew. Lieutenant Brown served in the 14th Company, 18th Regiment, Officers Training Camp, Plattsburgh, New York, and later served in France. Representing Lieutenant Emery Little Bryan, who served in the 152nd Depot Brigade at Camp Upton, Yaphank, New York. That's at the very end of Long Island. During World War I, is his great-grandnephew Benjamin Bryan, Benjamin's wife Sharon, and their daughter Emery's great-great-grandniece Vivian Bryan, as well as his great-great-grandnephew Vincent Jessio from Pittman, New Jersey. These same individuals are here on behalf of Private George Russell Bryan, who served in Troop A, 1st New York Cavalry. That was a New York Guard unit. Benjamin, in this case, is George's great-grandson, Vivian, his great-great-granddaughter, and Vincent, his great-grandson. Bonnie Jessio is his granddaughter and unfortunately was not able to make it, but she wrote a note to her grandfather and sent the note to me, which I thought was quite touching, and with her permission, I'm quoting just one small piece of that letter. She said, and this is just in part, "I just want to say how proud I am for your service to this country." This is again being addressed to her grandfather. "How proud I am that you served to keep our country free." I'm sure those are comments that all of you would echo on behalf of your ancestor or relative. Representing Private Frank Elias, who served on the USS Prometheus, a repair ship. We have his grandniece, Evelyn Raymond, his great-grandniece, Heather Raymond. They're both from Hurleyville, New York. Evelyn's friend, Doug Schuler from Sebastian, Florida. His granddaughter, Karen Gerard. Karen's husband, Dave, from Levittown, New York. And his great-granddaughter, Amanda Gerard, from Smithtown, New York. These same people are also here to represent William Elias. Private William Elias was Frank's brother. William served in Company A, 105th Infantry Regiment of the 27th Infantry Division at Camp Wadsworth in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Carolyn and Evelyn are his grandnieces. Amanda and Heather are his great-grandnieces. Until I did some of this research, I did not know that there ever was a Camp Wadsworth in Spartanburg, South Carolina. There's a Camp Wadsworth, a Fort Wadsworth, right at the tip of Brooklyn, which is the only Wadsworth I knew of until just now. So you helped educate me. Thank you. Representing Captain Dudley J. Morton. Good. He was in the Medical Reserve Corps. He served at Base Hospital number 14 in Fort Oglethorpe, Hargrave, Georgia. His grandson, Christopher Morton, is here from East Boston, Massachusetts. Thank you. Representing Lieutenant Marcus Mills Munsill. Lieutenant Munsill served in the 102nd Munition Train, again at Camp Wadsworth, Spartanburg, South Carolina, and overseas with the 29th Infantry Division. I expected to see his granddaughter, Kate Cockle-Reese, here. She's here, great. She came in from West Barnstable, Mass. I'm from Maine, and I hope I pronounced Barnstable, Mass. correctly. His granddaughter, Sally Burke, second person, good, also from West Barnstable, Mass. And they were to be joined by two friends, Becky and John Edwards from New York City. They're here too. Everybody's here. Colonel Grayson Mallet Provost Murphy. his relatives were here at the dedication ceremony, but were not able to make this luncheon. He was a European commissioner as a military officer to the American Red Cross, and we expected to see attending the first service, the dedication service, his granddaughter Ellen and her husband Warner, Minor Warner, his great-grandson John Murphy, and his great-great-grandson Peter Payne IV, as well as his granddaughter Patty Payne, all traveled from New York City. Representing Corporal and later Reverend George Carruthers Bonnell, is his son Bruce Bonnell and Bruce's wife Margaret McCabe. They came in from Harwich, Mass. George Carruthers Bonnell was the son of Dr. Bonnell, our senior pastor that I mentioned earlier, John Sutherland Bonnell. And this room here is named after Dr. John Sutherland Bonnell. His photo is on the right. Dr. Kirkland's photo is on the left. Interesting, Dr. Bonnell served in the Canadian Army in World War I prior to joining this church as our senior pastor. Representing Ensign James Fearon Brown, Jr., a group standing up again. Ensign Brown was the son of James Fearon Brown that we mentioned earlier for service in World War I. Ensign Brown served on the battleship USS New Jersey. Again, Nan Rawlings, Carrie Stefaniak, and Alice Brown, nieces. His great-grandnephew, Matthew Risk. Representing Major Thomas Riggs Cox at today's dedication, but unable, okay. Fortunately, Samuel R. Cox, his great-great-grandson, at the last minute was able to attend this event. His wife, Samuel's wife, Catherine, and their two daughters, who would have been, the daughters would have been great-great-granddaughters of Major Thomas Riggs Cox, are here today. As well as a great-great-grandson, Sebastian. Representing Signalman 3rd Class John Willoughby Crandall, Jr., who served obviously in the Navy as a signalman 3rd Class. His daughter Jennifer Crandall from Manhattan, New York. His son Jeffrey and Jeffrey's wife Lena from Scarsdale, New York. Grandson Nicholas Crandall, also from Scarsdale. And a grandson, Zachary Story, did not make it, or?
No, he did.
No.
He had to leave.
Okay. Representing Chaplain, at that time, Lieutenant Junior grade, a Navy rank, Wallace Newell Jamison. Attending here today is his daughter, Kate Eelman, Kate's husband, Bruce Eelman, coming in from Auburndale, Florida, his son, Robert Jamison, Dr. Robert Jamison, and Robert's wife, Lisa. They come in from Melrose, Massachusetts. His son, James Jamison, from Jacksonville, Illinois. His grandson, Paul Jamison, and Paul's wife, Mary, from Nashville, Tennessee. And his grandson, Kevin Eelman, Kevin's wife, Dawn, and and their daughter, Kelly Eelman. Kelly would be a great-granddaughter of Chaplain Jamison. His grandson, they're from Hillsborough, New Jersey. His grandson, Eric Eelman, from North Plainfield, New Jersey. Representing Major Fred Lee Liebolt is his son, Frederick Lee Liebolt, Jr., and Frederick's wife, Suzanne, from Manhattan, New York. They probably traveled the shortest distance. I think they're on Parker Lexington Avenue, so close by. We'll have somebody stand up now for 3 different people. Representing Captain Howard McCluskey Palmer. His daughter, Margaret Carroll, from Stillwater, Oklahoma. His granddaughter, Emily Carroll, also from Stillwater, Oklahoma. And his daughter, Beverly Palmer, coming in from Chattanooga, Tennessee. These three people are related to Robert E. Palmer, Lieutenant Robert Evans Palmer. Margaret and Beverly are his nieces, and Emily is their grandniece. And last but not least, in the Palmer clan, we have Captain William Edmund Palmer, who, again, both of these second Palmers were brothers. There's three brothers together. Same relationship for these three people as to Robert Evans Palmer, nieces and grandniece. This is actually a clip of a photo of the marriage ceremony that was held by Dr. Bonnell to Captain Frederick Holiday Rodney's, Captain Frederick Holiday Rodney and his wife getting married by Dr. Bonnell. His grandson here, Lane Rodney, is from Stamford, Connecticut, along with his wife, Sonhild. Representing Technical Sergeant Joyce Marie Stannard. Her daughter, the folks that are here that I believe are here, her daughter Karen Moriarty and Karen's husband, John, coming in from Smithtown, New York. Joyce's daughter, Lynn Kelly, and Lynn's husband, James Castellan, from Media, Pennsylvania. A granddaughter, Kate Moriarty, from Brooklyn. A grandson, Liam Castellan, and Liam's wife, Angela Huxford, coming in from Pittsfield, Massachusetts. Thank you. Certainly, as I was going through these introductions, if I mispronounced your name or gave the wrong relationship of your veteran ancestor, I apologize. I've spent a fair amount of time in genealogy and a lot of emails back and forth with all of you, so hopefully I got it right, but if I didn't, my apologies. By my count, that's 61 people that came here today to honor 20 members and friends of this church who served in these three conflicts. I'd like to thank Roxo Caterers, the people who did the luncheon. Hopefully you found that to be a good meal. And certainly, if you have any other questions, I'll be happy to answer questions. But most importantly, thank you very much for coming to today's event. It's really been made special to me, I think to Dr. Black Johnston, and others on the staff, knowing that you folks made it, as well as interested members of our congregation. But without you, it would not have been nearly as meaningful an event. So thank you. Thank you.